So today we have Keilani Fang, Field Conservation Programs Coordinator, and Tori Bird, Conservation Action Coordinator, and they're going to be talking about the Hogle Zoo, our watershed, and you. So please welcome them.
Thank you so much. Hogle Zoo has been at our current location at the mouth of Immigration Canyon since 1931. And while it is understandable that the first thing that people think about when they think about the zoo is the animals, there's nowhere else in the state you're going to see a polar bear, hopefully. We are a lot more than that. We're a recreation destination for people to bring their families and experience nature. We're an education center with a wonderful education team, and we are a conservation organization. Conservation is really central to our mission, and we look at these three pillars as we employ this, of science, collaboration, and outreach. Evidence-based decision-making to advance recovery of imperiled species and habitat. We want inclusive approaches to effectively support and engage our community and our partners. Monitoring and evaluation of these partnerships and programs. And best practices to foster environmental sustainability and climate resilience. All of this to maximize our conservation impact in Utah and globally. We have two programs currently that are connected to our watershed. These are our flagship Utah programs. These are species recovery of the western boreal toad and habitat restoration at the Jordan River.
So, starting off with toads, why do we care about toads? These little guys, what do they do for us? Why has the zoo made this one of our flagship programs? So, as we said, we wanted to focus our conservation efforts locally in Utah. We can have a huge impact right here in the state, not just internationally. And amphibians are the most threatened vertebrate group globally. Around 40% of all amphibians are threatened by extinction. And they are excellent indicators of habitat quality. So if the toad population starts to decline, that's an indication there's something else in the watershed that's going on and is worth investigation. Additionally, the DWR has identified boreal toads as a Utah species of greatest conservation need. This is because we're seeing population declines across the state, and that is due to habitat degradation, chytrid fungus, and climate change. So Hogle Zoo is uniquely positioned to support boreal toad recovery through our partnership with the DWR. Based off these four big areas. I'm going to break down each of these in the next few slides, but just to give you a preview, we do biological field research, and that helps us close any data gaps that there's some missing information. Through community engagement, captive breeding and population management, as well as reintroduction, and educational outreach. There's a fun little video of some toads in action. And there's a photo of one of our survey sites, and that's kind of the typical environment that you'll probably see them in. So we have this nice video by Sageland Collaborative. If you saw Sierra's talk earlier this morning, you can see the great work she does, and she does that work for our toads. So in this video, she runs us through kind of what a field survey looks like. Pretty cute. We're taking some measurements there, and that's one of our interns releasing them after we collected data on their biometrics, presence, life stage, breeding, what the habitat looks like, what are the threats at that specific site. And this is all to help us determine site viability for future repatriation or translocation. So we have that fun video by Sierra and Sageland. We have some interns collecting water quality data at the top right. Just a fun photo of toads on the data sheet that we fill out, and kind of one of our sites near the release site down south. So on the far left here, you can see a map of all of our monitoring sites across the state. You can see that we're really heavily focused on that central Wasatch Spine at high elevations. But zooming into the Salt Lake County watershed, one of the sites of particular interest from 2024 is Silver Lake. I'm sure many, if not all of you, have been there, and you've seen how heavily recreated it is. There's around 250,000 visitors annually. And if you've been in recent years, you may have seen that there is construction going on the boardwalk, and that is to help people see the site but not tromp through the wetlands. But you can see that there has been some disturbance there through construction, visitors. But in 2024 is the suspected first ever evidence of breeding in at least 100 years. So that was super exciting. We had a really large breeding event where we saw tadpoles, and then they emerged onto land. So the Forest Service blocked off the boardwalk, prevented people from coming, and we had some Hogle Zoo volunteers actually come and kind of guide toads onto land and make sure they got there safely, which is pretty cute. So a site like Silver Lake just goes to show the importance of our work to understand sites that are facing kind of human-wildlife conflict potentially, and further research, and to maybe we focus our survey efforts more intensively at sites like this moving into the future. And we're able to do all this work with the help of Sageland Collaborative through community science. They can join me on a guided survey. You can see in the top photo here. We are at Strawberry Reservoir with help from the DWR there. Or you can conduct an independent survey and check out a backpack with all of the field gear you would need to complete a survey by yourself. And you can check that out from Sageland Collaborative's office or Hogle Zoo. So for these long-term monitoring projects, community science is really effective because methods for toad surveys are relatively easy to learn, especially combined with an early season spring training, where we teach our volunteers the methods and kind of what a survey looks like and why this work is important and how we couldn't do all of it without them. So having community scientists increases survey effort. We have more boots on the ground, more eyes looking for toads, and that is super helpful. Additionally, Hogle Zoo is kind of in a prime position to connect the general public to public agencies like the DWR and create transparency in the work that they do and kind of build that trust up. And it's really fun. I love seeing people come out on surveys with me. Hopefully we find a toad. They can see a toad, hold a toad, see the habitats they are in and the disturbances they face. They can take that lesson back to their homes, their families, their communities, and spread that message wide. So we don't just work in the field at Hogle Zoo. We opened a new exhibit this year called Wild Utah. If you haven't heard about it or been yet, highly recommend. In this new exhibit space, we're featuring Utah native species, and that includes the boreal toad. So you can see our amphibian conservation breeding center there, and you can go and see a toad for yourself if you can't join us on a survey. And we work with Denver Zoo, Loveland Living Planet Aquarium, and Omaha Henry Dorley Zoo, as well as Wild Wheat Fish Hatchery run by the DWR, to breed and release these toads back into the wild. Additionally, outside of the field, some of the questions I get asked most often are why toads? We kind of covered that earlier. A lot of people don't even know that we have toads in Utah because they are a non-game, non-sport, and rarely seen species. And then a lot of people saw toads when they were really young and don't see them anymore. So we kind of want to address these misconceptions and kind of educate people on why this species is important going forward. So we do that through media outreach, both traditional media avenues and with the help of Sageland through social media. We do presentations like this and more so with the general public. And then through Wild Utah, we have dedicated exhibit space, like I mentioned, and on-grounds interpretation, where we talk about habitat degradation, chytrid disease, and all those things. We also have dedicated education staff that visit second grade classrooms across the state, and they bring a boreal toad with them, and they can teach these kids about the threats and the toads in general, and then they can go home to their families and continue to spread that message. In this photo here on the right, we have one of our Hogle Zoo interns at Silver Lake who found a toad, and there happened to be a school field trip going on while we were doing our survey. And you see a bunch of people walking through the wetlands with gloves on and clipboards, and it's kind of a weird sight. So we stop and talk to people as we survey and let them know what we're doing and are transparent about our surveys. So this is a video of Tori releasing a toad at our release site. These were toads that were collected as eggs from the wild, reared in captivity at Hogle Zoo, and then released, bred those toads and then released their offspring later on. So in total, we have dedicated over 11,000 hours in the field, 175 dedicated volunteers, and a lot of these volunteers are people who come back year after year and are getting more informed and better at conducting surveys every year. We have documentation of new breeding sites in the Wasatch and Uintas, improved habitat quality through building BDAs and building exclosure fences for ungulates and cattle, specifically at the release site. And then I mentioned successful breeding and reintroduction, and we've seen these toads survive the winter, and we've seen them in the years following these surveys. So we know that the work we're doing is having an impact. Turn it over to Tori.
Our second watershed project is along the Jordan River, or Pia Okwai, which I expect most of you are quite familiar with. It runs from Utah Lake to the Great Salt Lake. It's been a very important part of this watershed and a vital resource for as long as people have been in the valley. Historically, it was about 250 miles, but through channelization and redirecting, straightening, it is currently about 52 miles. And all of this straightening and human-imposed adjustments to this river have resulted in a very unnatural river, which faces challenges like bank destabilization and habitat loss. This is also an urban river, which faces unique challenges like trash pollution. And it has historically been kind of neglected, and we've sort of turned our backs on it for a long time. But the recent years have seen huge increase in appreciation and support of this river, both by the general public and by our state leadership, who now are able to appreciate the potential value of this river for recreation, for incredibly important habitat for our urban wildlife, and for economic benefits. So the zoo knew from the success of our toad program that we wanted more ways to engage our community in active restoration and conservation work. We support a lot of international conservation, but we know that it can be difficult for people to understand the importance of, say, conserving orangutans in Borneo. But we believe that if they can see the positive impacts of conservation in our own shared backyard, they will be more willing and able to understand its importance globally. And we know that not everyone has the ability or desire to go out and hike through our high mountains, so we wanted more ways to engage them closer to home. The next thing we looked at was guest familiarity. When we work internationally in places like Mozambique, we often talk to people and they have no idea where that is. And when we're at the zoo in particular, we have a very short amount of time to talk with people. So by the time you've explained to them where Mozambique is, their 4-year-old is like all the way across the zoo, and you haven't even talked about lions yet. So we did a survey, and we found out that about 65% of zoo guests either live within 10 miles of the Jordan River or cross it on their daily commute. So they're already familiar with the river and the challenges it faces, which puts us that many steps forward in engaging them in conversations about its conservation at the zoo. And next is location. We have Immigration Creek running right through our zoo, which is a tributary to the Jordan River, a clear connection on our grounds to this body of water. And 52 miles of river gives us 52 miles of potential touch points with our community and need. We talked about habitat loss, bank destabilization, pollution. So when we considered all of these things together, the Jordan River was a clear choice for our next community engagement conservation initiative. So once we'd identified the Jordan River as somewhere we wanted to work, we knew we needed to find the experts. Because while there are a lot of things that Hogle Zoo does well, like long-term engagement, volunteer recruitment, and securing of grant funds, we know that we cannot be experts on everything, and finding and working with the people that are experts is essential to successful conservation work. So we applied the same qualifications that we have for our international partners. They needed to be subject matter experts, working boots on the ground with the community and in the environment, and both organizations needed to benefit from this partnership. When we looked at this, the Jordan River Commission was the clear answer for a partner for this. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them and their incredible work. They were created in 2010 by an interlocal cooperation agreement to implement the Blueprint Jordan River, a long-term plan for the restoration of this river. They're a technical resource that help with the planning and coordination of, and importantly, responsible development, because we know that the Salt Lake Valley is increasing in our population at an incredible rate, and this area is going to develop, and to make sure this is being done responsibly is incredibly important to us all. And that coordination, 19 municipalities that this river runs through, and I'm sure everyone knows in this room just how hard it is to get people to work together. So having an organization that's dedicated to helping facilitate that is essential to the work along the Jordan. So we started our partnership with the Jordan River Commission in 2018, and we focused on cleanups, trash pollution, both in the river from canoes and along the banks. We then moved into tall pot tree planting and invasive species removal. Who's had their day ruined by puncture vine or goat's heads? Yeah, I talked to someone who once said that they stopped using the Jordan River after they got 3 flat tires in one day. So we're able to get large groups of people out there and removing these invasive species to improve this habitat for our local native species. Planting these tall pot trees, they have 32-inch root systems, so we aim to get them down into the water table to reduce the need for supplemental watering and help stabilize those banks. We plant pollinator gardens. We have a monarch way station in Riverton to support that declining species, as well as the many other important pollinators that utilize the corridor. We go back to the tree planting sites and do understory plantings with shrubs and flowers to diversify and stratify the habitat. We do reseeding events after disturbances such as construction, and especially after we do invasive species removal, with a seed mix made by the Jordan River Commission of native, drought-resistant, fire-resilient seeds to help ensure we're getting the beneficial plants that we want there at the river. And this last year, we added makers events that we do both at the zoo and at river to create items that can be used in our restoration work and further engage people with the river. And all of this is with the aim of a whole and healthy habitat corridor. And we all know that the Great Salt Lake is a very important part of our local watershed. And the Jordan River is one of 3 tributaries. So we can't talk about the Jordan without talking about the Great Salt Lake. It's a hotspot for shorebirds, and it's a terminal basin. So there's this one trash boom on the Jordan River that collects trash, floating trash, before it flows into the wetlands. This one trash boom collects about 2 to 3 tons of trash every 3 months. Any guesses about what the #1 thing it catches is? Plastic bottles. About 65 to 75% of that is plastic bottles. So when we are engaging people with the Jordan River, we're also engaging them with the Great Salt Lake and hoping that they will become invested in its long-term health and restoration. There's also socioeconomic considerations in working along the Jordan River. It runs through the most diverse neighborhoods in the Salt Lake Valley. And we're really keen to engage that community that lives right along the river, where sometimes green spaces have been less available or less well maintained. And we really believe that by engaging, especially like the student groups and the neighbors in continuing restoration projects, we're making long-term stewards who are going to continue to care for this river into the future. So through this, since 2018, we've had 92 events, more than 1,300 community engagement participants, 4,700 hours, hundreds of trees, I'm sure thousands of pounds of trash. And while those are all really important and really tangible things that we've done, one of the most important things to me is the work that this work has shown to me that we really can, by engaging our community, change their perception. It's really common that we start these events with somebody coming up to me and saying, I do not have a good perception of the Jordan River. I have avoided coming here in the past. And it's so gratifying how often these events end with those same people coming to me and telling me that by engaging in this work and being in the environment, they now have a more positive perception, and they look forward to coming back with their friends and family to engage with this environment. I think this is how we make really important change, not only for the habitat, but also for the community. Our work goes beyond these volunteer events. We also know that not everyone's going to come to a volunteer event, and we really want to meet people where they are. So in looking to do that, we saw libraries as a really wonderful partner. They are trusted in their communities. They are already ingrained in there, and they're free, really importantly. So we got a grant in 2022 to launch our library nature kits. There are several of the libraries that are actually right up against the Jordan River. So the kits were created with the Jordan River in mind, but could be used in any green space or anywhere in our watershed. They were checked out over 1,000 times in their first 6 months, many times by this young man who has now decided he would like to be a wildlife biologist. And these high circulation numbers right out the gate really showed us that there's a huge desire from our community for more opportunities to connect to their green space and waterways. We have these kits now in all Salt Lake City and county libraries, in Utah county libraries. I do hope to one day expand to Davis County, and we're currently working on additions to the kits to make them more usable year-round. Our final prong of our Jordan River work is wildlife monitoring through cameras. We work with Dr. Austin Green with Sageland Collaborative and the University of Utah School of Biological Science Conservation Ecology Lab on the Wildlife Watch project. So we are the urban wing of that project. Since 2020, we've had about 20 cameras out on the Jordan River over about 25 miles of the river. These cameras have taken more than 2 million photos. A lot of them are not of animals. If you want a time lapse of a thistle growing, I've got many. But a lot of them are animals. We're really interested in what wildlife is using this river and how. We've documented more than 20 species through this project, really highlighting it as an important migratory corridor and habitat for our urban wildlife. We've been able to contribute data to publications through the Urban Wildlife Information Network, which is a national and actually now international with Latin America and Europe coming on board, collaboration of trail camera researchers, creating a huge data pool for people to contribute to. Publications that have come out of this have looked at how wildlife responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, with more people recreating outside, and then one looking at how gentrification affects wildlife. So now I'm gonna take a minute for collective joy to look at some wildlife. Yeah, urban wildlife, like these raccoons who have clearly seen The Shining. Interspecies interactions. It's a skunk and a fox and a raccoon and a deer. Feathered friends also. Hunting behaviors. Got a coyote with something furry and a fox with a very large fish. Parental behaviors and information on breeding. Ecosystem engineers. Silly selfies. That one's a fish. And some great surprises. This is a series of 2 stags interlocked, where our last photo, this guy has all 4 of his feet off of the ground.
So as we look ahead for Hogle Zoo and what is next for us, in terms of Western boreal toads, we want to continue on the successes and build on the partnerships that we already have, which means contributing to and executing on the DWR's repatriation plan. We will do this by evaluating our survey effort moving forward and identifying priority sites like Silver Lake, where we may want to conduct more intensive surveys more often, or this could also be exploratory sites of the state that maybe haven't received as much attention as they should have in the past. Additionally, we want to evaluate and expand on our community science impact and future research opportunities involving these toads.
Well, for the Jordan River, we're going to continue to return to some of these restoration sites, our monarch way stations, and these planting sites. We're going to go continue to do the habitat diversification and stratification. We're going to work with the Jordan River Commission on new restoration sites. And in Wild Utah, we do have a maker space on our grounds. We have about 1 million guests a year, and we want to find more ways to engage them in our work and connect them to conservation. So we do things like we call them seed dumplings. You might have heard them called seed bombs. You can't say bomb on the radio, so seed dumplings. And solitary bee nesting spaces, all these things to connect them while they're at their zoo and enthusiastic about animals and conservation. And we're about to embark on an evaluation of this program with a volunteer survey to continue to grow the program, make sure that it is making the effects that we want in our environment.
Okay, so the you part of our presentation, how you can get involved. Like I said, you can join us on an amphibian survey, or if anyone you know would be interested in that, send them our way, or join on a Jordan River restoration event. You can keep your eye out for the Toad Community Science Training in March of 2025, and Jordan River habitat restoration events are happening twice every month. And if you have more ideas on research or other collaborations that we may not have thought of or reached out to you already about, you can email us here, and if you scan this QR code, it'll take you to our community science page if you would like to get involved. Thank you.
Hello. So I grew up in Draper, Utah, and I had a little tiny stream that ran through my backyard that, every year when I grew up there was toads that would emerge and come out near the stream. It was cute. It was a fun moment in my childhood. But I guess that what goes along with this story, I guess, is what's a way for the community to, is there something like Merlin Bird ID where someone could take a picture of the toad and identify it and then sort of monitor its conservation and populations within urban streams?
Yeah, that is a great question. A really great way to get involved. Like I said, join in on Hogle Zoo's independent surveys to learn more about toads and conduct those surveys on your own. If you turn that data in back to us, we can then go and explore those sites further and communicate that to our partners at the state. Additionally, I think that Sageland Collaborative will be, or they have announced their new program called Herp Search, and I think that is kind of what you're thinking about, where you would go, take a photo of that toad, and then it would be reported back to these same agencies to help with management of these species and understanding where they are, what times of year, and all of that.
Is that through INAT?
Yes, that is through iNaturalist. Yeah. Does that get to your question pretty good? Okay.
Still have time for a couple more questions if anyone's got them. Well, if that's it, please round of applause for our presenters here.